Again, here's your claim evidence reasoning worksheet, and at the top, you just have a definition for each part. So the first two are the easiest. Okay, you're going to make a claim. That's how you're going to start. And it's going to be a statement about the solution to a problem or the statement to the research question. So like, for example, let's go all the way back to Semmelweis. Okay, the question he was trying to ask is, how can I reduce the rate of childbed fever in my ward? And then his claim would be washing hands reduces the rate of childbed fever. It's a statement about your results. It's basically a statement that kind of summarizes what your results were. Okay, that is your claim. Your evidence is going to be data to support that. Now, if it's a lab that we completed in class, this will be data that you collected. So when our bread finally grows mold and you collect that data, when you're writing your conclusion for that, it'll be from your own data. Okay, but sometimes I'll give you a question or I'll give you a problem in here, and it'll be like a graph or a data table, and you'll draw your evidence from that. So your evidence is either going to be data you collect from your experiment or data that I give you to analyze. Okay, and the last thing you're going to do is connect your evidence to your claim. You're going to explain. It's your justification. Okay, why does your evidence support your claim is what reasoning is. Okay, and it says here, you're supporting your claim using scientific principles, and that's going to be your background knowledge. So it's going to be what you've learned in this class or what you've researched. Or maybe it's something like today with the example we're doing, it's going to be background knowledge that you probably already have, but you're tying it back to what you already know. All right, and these are some practice problems, but before we do a practice problem, we're going to do an example together. So I'm going to take you all the way back to like the 1800s again, okay, and the idea of spontaneous generation. Do you guys know what spontaneous generation is? Where do living things come from? Other living things, right? And you guys know that. But we didn't always know that. Like, for example, one example of spontaneous generation is like in the streets. Like if the streets are really dirty and there was a lot of filth and trash, there would also be rats in the street. And so people thought rats generate from trash. Trash produces rats. What was really happening? The rats were attracted to the trash, right? So spontaneous generation is the idea that non-living things can produce life. And it was a common idea. And so one of the other ideas was about meat and maggots. So we didn't have refrigeration. We didn't know about bacteria and viruses. So sanitation overall, not that great. If you left a piece of meat out for several days, maggots would grow in the meat. And some people were like, oh, that must mean that meat produces maggots. Maggots come from meat. And other people were like, no, maggots come from the air. They just generate from the air. And then this guy named Francis Reedy was like, no, you're all wrong. When you leave meat out on the counter, flies come to the meat. They lay their eggs, and maggots are produced from the flies. Flies are producing maggots. Maggots come from flies. And people are like, no, you're crazy. That can't be right. So he did an experiment to support it. So the question he's trying to figure out is, where do maggots come from? And that's the question that you guys have on the top of your sheet that says CER class example. This sheet. Okay, you've got the question, where do flies come from? And again, this is going to be obvious to you, but it wasn't obvious to them. So, to make his point, okay, he set up this experiment. And remember, our three competing claims here are that maggots come from meat, maggots come from the air, and maggots come from flies. So he set up an experiment to test each of those claims. He set up one flask that was unsealed with meat in the bottom of the flask. Okay, when he left it open, several days later, maggots developed in that flask. He did a second flask that was completely sealed, and after several days, no maggots developed. And then he did a third flask, okay, where it was covered in gauze. And somebody in another class asked me what gauze is. Do you guys know what gauze is? It's like a thin or cheesecloth. Maybe we call it cheesecloth today. It's thin enough that air can get in, but the flies cannot. Okay, so based on this evidence, what would your claim be? Where do flies come from? You're answering your question. Your claim is the answer to the question. So based on this evidence, okay, I only have maggots in the unsealed flask. What should your claim be? Where do maggots come from? Maggots come from flies. That should be your claim. Okay, which one of these flasks, we'll just call them 1, 2, 3. Which flask shows that maggots don't come just from meat? There's actually more than one. Which flasks show you that maggots can't come from meat? Flask 2, but also flask 3, right? Because if it came from meat, they would show up there as well. Which flask shows that maggots don't come from the air? Which flask, in other words, has air penetrating but nothing else can penetrate? 3, yeah. So those are our 3 flasks. These were our results. And from that, you guys just made a claim. Okay, I'm going to make it right here, but you have a box on your paper. Your claim, based on the evidence, is that maggots come from flies. Again, probably not groundbreaking for you, but an important discovery back then, because now we can do something to prevent that, right? Now that we know that maggots come from flies, we know we can seal our meat and we're not going to have that problem anymore. So it was an important question for then. All right, so we've got our claim. There's several ways you could write your evidence. We'll come back to that slide. Okay, but how would you word your evidence? What is your evidence that maggots come from flies? Where is the only flask that flies are present? Or I should say that maggots are present. 1, 2, or 3? The first one, okay? So what you're going to say is that maggots only form in an unsealed flask. Got it? Okay, now the bottom part of your worksheet that you have, the bottom part of your graphic organizer, I went ahead and I wrote it all out for you. So instead of you guys writing this first one, you're just going to identify the parts. Now I need to do my reasoning. It's the hardest part. You guys picked out the claim and the evidence, and honestly, like 90% of the time, that's what students get right. But then when it's time to do reasoning, sometimes we don't do enough. Okay, a good CER, okay, so a good conclusion in the reasoning is going to address the counterclaim, okay, talking about the evidence against the counterclaim. And it's going to end in a little summary statement. So you're going to give your why using the results. You're going to explain why the results support your data and why your results do not support the counterclaim. So that's what you guys have here. Okay, and we're going to find the different parts. So this would be like about what I would expect for you for a conclusion in my class. Your conclusions will be about this long. Okay, so we've got maggots come from flies. Maggots only developed in the open flask. In the open flask, flies can land on the meat and lay eggs. The eggs hatch into maggots and maggots become flies. If maggots came from meat, then flies should form in all vials. If flies came from air, maggots would grow in the vial with galls. Only the open vial has maggots. Therefore, flies only come from other flies. Okay, what did I start with? I hit you right in the beginning with what? What is this? Is it your claim, your evidence, or your reasoning? It's your claim. So you don't have to get real pretty or fancy with your writing. You're just going to start with your claim as straightforward as you can write it. Okay, so none of this, my experiment shows that maggots come from flies. Just jump right in. Maggots come from flies. That's your claim. Okay, look at my very next sentence. Maggots only developed in the open flask. What is that? Claim, evidence, or reasoning. It's your evidence. So underline it and label it so you've got it as an example. And then everything between that and my summary statement is my reasoning. Okay, so in the open flask, flies can land on the meat and lay eggs. That is really your background knowledge. It's obvious to you, but that is something that you couldn't pick off the paper. You couldn't pick just from looking at his experiment. That's something that you would have to know. Maggots are the larvae of flies. You have to know that to explain. You have to give that as your reasoning. So all of this, okay, given the why, given the background knowledge here, you don't have to underline that. I'm just doing it so you know where I'm at. Okay, and then the eggs hatch into flies, and the eggs hatch into maggots, and maggots become flies. All of that is like your background information, and then the counterclaims are addressed. If maggots come from meat, then flies should form in all vials. If flies came from air, maggots would grow in the vial with galls. All of that's your reasoning. So draw a box around all of that. Okay, and label it as your reasoning. So what is going to take you the most time to do? The chunk of your conclusion is going to be your reasoning. Okay, and then I'm going to give a summary statement to wrap it up. Okay, here's my summary statement. So a good way to just have a method to always write your summary, you can use therefore. Okay, that tells your reader I'm summing it up. That was my reason. I'm done with my conclusion now. Therefore, flies only come from other flies. Okay, this is my summary statement. You found it and it's signed? Okay, I'll send you down in just a minute, okay? She's probably back in the library by now. All right, now, what I want you guys to realize is you do this all the time. Your brain, when it processes information, is always reasoning. And it's just something that you don't think about. So for an everyday example, let's say that we came in this morning, and when I came in and put my stuff down, I put down a motorcycle helmet, a leather jacket, and I put down my license, and my license has like a motorcycle class. I have a motorcycle license. What would you assume? If I ask, how did I get to school this morning, what would you say? Okay, Miss K drove a motorcycle to school. I did not. I drove a minivan to school. Okay, but Miss K drove a motorcycle to school. Why do you think that? What led you to that claim, to that conclusion? If I said, why do you think I drive a motorcycle? What would you say? Okay, you would just say, because you have a helmet, a leather jacket, and a motorcycle license. Well, is that reasoning or is that evidence? That's just the evidence. You're not going to give me the reasoning because that's what your brain is doing that you do all the time without really thinking about it. So what you're doing now with the CER is you're explaining as if you're giving this information to someone from outer space who has no idea how anything works. Okay, that's how you write a CER. So it wouldn't be enough to just say you have a motorcycle license, a leather jacket, and a helmet. You would have to explain why that supports that I ride a motorcycle. So how does the leather jacket and the helmet support that? Why would I need those things? Okay, a helmet and a leather jacket protect you when you're driving a motorcycle. Why would I need a license? How does that support that I drive a motorcycle? Again, it's obvious to you guys. but I'm from somewhere else and I have no idea what a license is. What do you have to tell me? Why do you have to have a license to drive? Okay, it is illegal to drive without a license. So in order to legally drive a motorcycle, you need to have a motorcycle license. Okay, that's what you have to explain. Okay, this is my bag for after school, and here's what I have in it. Okay, well, I should have it. Let's see. Where do you think I'm going after school? What is this? Okay, it's a karate belt. So where do you think I'm probably going after school? Who's doing karate? Do you have any evidence? Or you just have this belt? So could it be me doing karate? It could be me. Okay, well, here's what else I have in my bag. Okay. All right, is it me doing karate? No, what I have is a tiny little pink karate uniform. And you might remember that I have 3 kids. Okay, that's also some background knowledge that you might remember. I have 2 boys and I have a little girl. Okay, so based on this evidence, where am I going after school? Okay, I'm taking one of my kids, at least one of my kids, to karate, right? Because I have a tiny pink karate uniform and I have a belt. Okay, which one of my kids, this is a little bit of an assumption, okay, colors don't have genders, but who's usually going to wear a little pink karate uniform? A girl. So this karate uniform probably belongs to my daughter Lucy. So if I ask you, where do you think I'm going after school? And you said, you're probably taking your daughter to karate. Why do you think that? Okay, you're probably just going to say because you have a pink karate uniform and a belt. Okay, but is that reasoning or is that evidence? That's evidence. You did the reasoning all in your head. But on a CER, you have to explain to me. Okay, why does this show that my daughter's going to karate? What do you have to wear when you go to karate? A karate uniform, a gi, and a belt, right? How do you know that I'm not the one doing karate? Because the karate uniform is too small for me. Out of my 3 kids, why are you pretty sure that this belongs to my daughter? Because it's pink. My boys are also bigger than this, okay? But it's a pink karate uniform. So it probably belongs to a little girl. Now, boys can wear a pink karate uniform. I'm not saying they can't, but usually they don't, okay? At karate, it's only the little girls that have the pink uniforms. So you would just tell me you have a pink karate uniform and a karate belt. That's giving me evidence. You've got to go that step further and explain your reasoning. And that reasoning is what you're normally doing in your head. Okay, now when you're doing it for something for science, if it's a difficult topic, you guys are usually good about doing it. But what happens when it's like a simpler topic, we start to make assumptions about what somebody else knows. Okay, you can't make any assumptions. You are talking to an alien from outer space who has no idea how anything works when you're writing a CER. That's how I want you to practice it.